I'm Trevor Phillips. This is Common Ground, where each week we look for agreement on a hot-button issue dividing the nation.
We don't want to see any kid, any family going hungry in this country.
We have parents turning up here in tears. Literally, they will have fed the children and put them to bed. They won't have eaten themselves.
We've got generation after generation who cannot cook properly, they can't cook a meal from scratch, they cannot budget.
And I'm going to continue that diet because you've got to search for the hero inside yourself in the hope that that individual is considerably slimmer.
Boris, I ask you, dare I say it, I beg you, please reconsider backtracking on key parts of the childhood obesity strategy.
Apocalypse now, says the boss of the Bank of England. Inflation and war are triggering a food crisis. Sky News reports that 1 in 4 of us is missing a meal each day. But what about the war on obesity, say food campaigners, which could save the NHS billions from the cost of unhealthy eating? And until now, they thought that the government was on their side, ready to ban cheap food deals. But faced with a cost of living spiral, ministers still want you to bog off. Buy one, get one free. A former Tory leader today called the move morally reprehensible. Our choice: should good government shepherd us towards what it thinks are the right food choices, or should the war on junk food take a backseat to cutting the cost of living? In the next half hour, 2 passionate believers come head-to-head in the search for common ground. With me tonight, the cook, food writer and campaigner Thomasina Miers, and Christopher Snowdon, head of lifestyle economics at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Chris, let me start with you. We are the fattest nation in Europe, I think. Isn't it morally reprehensible, as Lord Hague puts it, for government to encourage harmful eating for a short-term fix to the cost of living crisis?
I think Malta is still a bit fatter than us, technically speaking. But, well, I mean, look, I think a lot of this comes down to evidence-based policy. And what we tend to do in this country on this issue is say, well, there's lots of fat people, it's terrible, and therefore let's come up with some ideas and we'll just implement them. Whereas I think we should be looking at each policy individually and saying, what good is this going to do? Is this going to do? What are the unintended consequences? What is it going to cost? Now, there are impact assessments for these policies. This bog-off ban, for example, is estimated in the impact assessment to reduce calorie intake by an average of 8 calories per person per day. It's a very, very trivial amount. It is also estimated to have a cost. I'm not quite sure what the cost is going to be, and these impact assessments are largely guesswork. But if you take something like a meal deal, which are very, very popular, millions of people every lunchtime go out for a meal deal, you know, if you have to buy those items individually, it's going to cost significantly more than it does £3 for a meal deal. And when we talk about junk food, we need to remember that it includes things like a ham and cheese sandwich. Okay? It's not actually junk food. And I think the media have been complicit with some of the campaigners in using this pejorative term, which makes people think of a handful of American fast food chains, when actually it includes things like raisins and butter and pasta. So you get yourself a chicken and bacon sandwich. Even if you have a healthy side and a bottle of water with it, that is going to be banned because it's junk food, supposedly. Now, that has a significant cost for millions of people. But people don't really think it through. We've not thought it through. We've not had a serious debate about any of these things.
Are you sure?
I believe that, on balance, the harm is greater than the pretty trivial benefits.
Are you sure it's evidence-based, or is it just you don't want to be told what to do and what to eat?
Well, I don't like being told what to do, but I accept being told what to do, as everybody does in a civilised society, because there's reasons to have laws and regulations. So there's lots of things I'd maybe quite like to do in a state of nature that I don't do, because I understand that there's a purpose to them and they're valuable. I don't think any of this anti-obesity stuff is.
All right. Thomasina, we are in a situation where people are missing meals every day, and because they can't afford them. Why shouldn't government, at least for the time being, just let people buy food that is cheap, that will take no time to prepare so they can get on with work?
I mean, we are in an epidemic. It's costing the NHS £18 billion a year, diet-related disease, which could be going towards subsidising fresh fruit and vegetables, which is what people on low incomes can't afford. not only can't they afford them, but it's very hard for them to get access to them. They live in food deserts, they live next to convenience stores, to fast food outlets. So it's really hard, especially the mums who've got, you know, double jobs, who can't cook in the evening, as you say. I'm not sure this stops that problem. What this does is help stop, you know, the bog-off, which a lot of it is junk food. And when I say junk food, I'm not talking about a ham and cheese sandwich. I'm talking about ultra-processed food, which we know is killing people. I mean, diet-related disease now kills more people than smoking or alcohol. And I kind of think it's a scandal that in a Western country where we should know better, we're allowing companies who profit on the backs of making people's lives miserable. And it's people on low incomes who often don't have the choice. And I guess what I'm saying is, if I'm a mum in Liverpool, my life expectancy is 11 years less than her neighbour in a more affluent part of Liverpool. So basically, she might never get to meet her grandchildren, because 11 years she's got less on her life. Her children are twice as likely to be obese. This is adversely affecting people on low incomes. And the whole legislation, which Boris put in, he made law, is trying to help people like that get onto better food. I mean, everyone loves some junk. You know, I eat Boosts, I like kettle chips, I like Ben & Jerry. We all like fun food like that. It's just not when it's half of your diet.
OK. Other crisps and ice creams are available. Chris, as Tommy's pointed out, the cost of obesity estimated to be at least £18 billion a year, half the defence budget, £400 per household, somebody reckons. Isn't it part of the duty of government and part of our duty to our fellow citizens to reduce that cost in the way that Thomasina has been talking about, and part of the government's business to make sure that we reduce those costs?
I think there are two answers to that. The first is that I don't think it was part of the deal in 1948 when the NHS was founded that we're going to get healthcare free at the point of use, but there's a whole list of footnotes and caveats and strictures saying that this only applies if you don't smoke and you lose weight and you only eat this and you don't drink too much. And I think if that was the deal in 1948, people would have said, no, you can stick with the NHS, we'll stick with private healthcare. The second answer is that actually, if you look at the economics of it, it doesn't stack up. This idea that the taxpayer, you know, the individual non-obese taxpayers are having to subsidise fat people's healthcare is not true. It wasn't true when they said about smoking. It's not true when they say about obesity. For a rather macabre reason, but we shouldn't bury our heads in the sand about this, which is that if you have lifestyle-related diseases that kill people 10 years early, whatever it may be, they are not taking out a pension for 10 years. They're not having healthcare during those 10 years. They're not having hip replacements and cataracts and so on. And actually, most of the health budget is spent on old people and old people's problems.
Yeah, but we are spending money on keeping people alive with health-related, smoking-related diseases. The consequences of obesity. I think that it's now reckoned that we spend more on type 2 diabetes than we do on cancer.
And if they didn't have these, what you call lifestyle-related diseases, would they not require any healthcare? No, they would live longer and actually require more healthcare in the end. There's a lot of economic evidence on this, actually. The smokers cost the least, obese people cost a bit less, and people who don't smoke and are slim cost the most over the course of a lifetime. And they cost most of that money when they're retired. They're not paying much into the system. They're mostly taking out. Now, that can easily be misconstrued, that argument, because I've made this argument before. Because people will then say, oh, you want to kill off people to try and be efficient. No, I'm not saying that.
So to be clear, we're not for killing off anybody.
We're not for culling people. We're not going to encourage people to smoke and get fat because it will save the taxpayer money. But it will save the taxpayer money. And if you're going to use the economic argument to try and justify paternalistic regulation, it's only fair for me to come back with the actual facts, because I think this is an example of what you're talking about, where people come up with an argument to justify something that actually is nothing to do with economics or
Tommy, you're paternalist.
Efficiency.
I'm not paternalistic at all. I think people should have choice. My issue is that people on low incomes don't have a choice. They're caught into a food cycle that is feeding them food that leads to cancer, diabetes, depression, to miserable existences. You have kids going to hospitals to have their teeth taken out because they're eating so much sugar. This food is cheap food, sure, but it doesn't give them any nutrition. It's not good food. I mean, do you like good food? Do you like delicious food? I love eating. I'm a chef. My business is to cook delicious food. You know, Oaxaca, my restaurants were put out there to try and have accessible food for all that's delicious And actually, when I went to Mexico, that's what I fell in love with the country, because there, although now it's the most obese country in the world, there's a whole nation of of people on any income who love food. And I feel that good food should not be for people who just can afford it. It should be for everyone. And I think my issue is that people on low incomes do not have access to fresh fruit and vegetables. They're only eating this food that is killing them, and that's not right.
I'm going to come back to... But just before we leave your argument, Chris, I wonder, you can say that, you know, the costs, we can argue about these precise costs, but there are costs associated with poor eating habits and obesity and so on. If we don't do something about all of that and do it now rather than sometime in never, never, how do we ever get to the low-tax paradise that I know you favour?
Well,
Because we'll have to be paying, you know, gazillions for the NHS.
Well, you don't have to have an NHS. You could have private healthcare insurance and so on, so that you would still be paying healthcare, but you wouldn't be paying it through the tax system. At the moment, we're paying 12% of GDP on healthcare in this country, £1 in £8, and it's going to go up. It will go up everywhere, and it's not going up because of people smoking and being obese. It's going up because we have an ageing society, and nobody has a plan of how to deal with this problem. And it's not just healthcare; it's also obviously pensions, right, and other welfare benefits. These two areas of government expenditure, healthcare and pensions, are going up all the time because we have an ageing society. That is what is going to bankrupt the NHS, if anything could, and nothing actually could in practice, just a slogan. But that is a major financial problem.
But it's sucking money out of everything else, surely.
But that is the real time bomb that we're facing, is how are we going to deal with a society in which, in a few years' time, you're going to have the average person has probably been out of work in various respects, whether in education or retired, for longer than they're in work.
Why should they be out of work just because they're old? I mean,
Because they'll
surely
retire.
But our retirement age is going up. Lots of people work.
It's going. You're right. That's the only answer, is to keep putting the retirement age up.
But lots of people take pleasure in working longer.
They do, but there's a lot of people who work in factories or postmen or farmers, and their bodies are knackered by the time they get to 65, let alone 70.
So then they have a non-economic contribution society, which might be volunteering in their local youth centre.
Okay.
But that's no use.
Let's just stick to today's dilemma. Let me ask you, Thomasina. Is the burden of your case a little bit, maybe not paternalistic, but not trusting people to make good choices?
Look, the fast food industry, or the ultra-processed food industry, is designed, it's a perfect blend of sugar, fats and salts that I can't resist, because I, like all us other humans, have been evolved over thousands of years to not be able to resist this perfect blend of fat and sugar and salt that makes it totally delicious. So if I go into a retailer and find a bog off on my favourite chocolate bar, not only will I buy it, but I'll eat both chocolate bars on the same day, even though I did not want to, because it's kind of irresistible. But because I can afford to also buy fresh fruit and vegetables, because I have a kitchen with more than just a microwave, I have time to cook it, then I will also have access to eating great food, and because I've been educated to do so.
But you know that you can make that choice, and so does every adult person.
No, they don't. They absolutely do not have that choice because they can't afford it. And, I'm a trustee of Chefs in Schools. It's a brilliant charity that puts chefs into school kitchens and transforms the way kids eat. Now, those kids in those schools who are on really low incomes, who qualify for free school meals, they love the food we give them. We're talking about fresh fruit and vegetables, vegetarian 2 or 3 times a week. It's such delicious food. It's home-cooked. It's 50p per meal per day cheaper than the mass contract caterers before. It's doing them good, and they love it. And the chefs in the schools are heroes. So why can't those kids have access to good food?
The mother you referred to in Liverpool
Yeah.
doesn't have time to go to chef school. She doesn't have time to think about these things. She has 2, 3 children, and she needs to get them fed. And this is an easy way to do so at the moment with the money she has. Surely she has to make her judgment for herself rather than having the choice taken away from her.
Well, for a start, we're not taking choice away. But let me just go back to your first point. So We have school food standards in this country. 80% of secondary schools aren't meeting them. So she would love her local school to feed her kids proper food, because that might be the only hot meal of the day that they get there, because she might have 2 jobs and not be able to cook at night. But the fact is, we're failing them because the government can't be bothered to, and the governors of all these schools, they can't be bothered to enforce the school food standards, which would be brilliant if we could, and it's affordable. So that's a really good economy of scale, and it's a neat way to give people fresh fruit and vegetables.
Nothing against improving standards of school meals at all. I think that's perfectly reasonable paternalism when you're dealing with children. I would say, I mean, I broadly agree with what you say there, but in actual fact, healthy food is not expensive. The supermarkets can't give a lot of the vegetables away. It's actually very cheap. And there's not really any such thing as a food desert in this country. There might be some in America, but vast majority of people in this country buy supermarket food. And when you go to the supermarkets, there's fruit and vegetables everywhere. The problem is people, this is what you're saying, I think, people can't cook it.
Chris,
or they don't have the time to cook it.
Chris, you should talk to any of the youngsters who work for Bite Back, which is another brilliant charity, where they are begging. They're begging governments to legislate. And not only are they begging people to legislate, because they get targeted on their smartphones, on television, and it's always junk food, because that's where the profit lies. No one targets them to eat more fresh fruit and vegetables. There are millions of pounds in advertising spent on targeting junk food to youngsters, because that's what gives people profit.
But people know what an apple tastes like. They know what banana tastes like. We've had the Change for Life programme, millions of pounds spent. Eat more fruit and veg. Eat 5 a day. Everybody knows all these things. Everyone knows fruit and veg is good for you. And it's also cheap. The trouble is, most people, including myself, cannot make much of a decent meal out of a bit of rice or pasta and vegetables. It doesn't taste great. And also, not everybody is as bothered about food as you are. You're in the restaurant business, you're very passionate about food. I'm not particularly, quite honestly. The less time I have to spend cooking a meal, the better. And there's lots of people like that. And it's interesting, I think, that a lot of food campaigners do happen to be from the restaurant business. Jamie Oliver, most obvious one. Prue Leith.
Let's
because I think they're passionate about what people eat, and they rather disapprove of what people like me eat.
I don't disapprove. I am absolutely... I mean, food is about pleasure. So whatever gives people pleasure is great. It's when people do not have a choice. So it's not only youngsters who are begging not to be targeted in their smartphones and on television with these junk food adverts. It's also the retailers. So I spoke to Mike Lewis 2 weeks ago at a food conference. He was the ex-CEO of Tesco's, the ex-CEO of Sainsbury's said the same. Even the CEO of Greggs have all said, give us regulation, because we know that the food we're giving people is not as healthy as it should be. It contains virtually no nutrition, a lot of it, lacking in fibre. I mean, the amount of fibre in our diets has plummeted over the last 50 years. That's one of the things that is making us so ill. They are begging for regulation because they can only make amends to their recipes and what they sell if other people do too, because otherwise there's not a level playing field.
OK, it may not entirely sound like it, but I can see a bit of common ground here. First of all, you both actually agree that healthy food, good thing, and that actually it doesn't have to be expensive. I think you both agree about that. What I think you may not quite agree with behaviour and to teach them better habits. So let's see if we can find some ways that we might agree about that. Chris, what about this issue? I know you say you can't be bothered, but actually you probably could be bothered if you... if somebody showed you a way of making a healthy meal quickly?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I don't know how unhealthy my meals are. I get a jar of some sauce and mix it in with some meat and put some rice or pasta in it, you know.
OK, can you give...
Is that junk food? Can
you give Chris a little life lesson here? Because I think...
Well, I mean, you know, I've been cooking since I was 6, so, yeah, I love food. I'm motivated by greed, I think. And I guess my difference is I think good food can also be nutritious. Like, delicious food can be nutritious. And my problem is that if 50% of our shopping basket in this country is ultra-processed, we're not getting basic nutrition. And that food doesn't satisfy you. So you end up eating more calories, which makes you fatter. So it's a kind of unhealthy food cycle you get yourself stuck into. I'd also argue that haven't got complete common ground. The cost of fresh fruit and vegetables has gone up way more than the cost of junk food over the last 30 years. And that's completely proven. So it's much harder for people to afford fresh fruit and vegetables. And also many people in low incomes have tiny kitchens. They just have a microwave in them. They don't have the time because they have 2 or 3 jobs. I mean, one of the things I'd really like to see is in schools where they have kitchens, not only to adhere to school food standards, but to have canteens in evenings. And in places like Liverpool, they're doing that. They're having social pantries run by locals because they don't have access to fresh fruit and vegetables, where they're getting together and buying in bulk fresh fruit and vegetables and cooking it for the community. People are going to pay for their food, but it's subsidised because they're bulk buying it and volunteers are cooking it. We've got to help people who've got no access to cooking, no knowledge because they haven't been taught at school. It's not their fault they're not cooking delicious fresh fruit and vegetables. If they don't have the space to do it, if they don't have the time to do it, it doesn't mean they don't want to do it. I mean, I feel there's a bit of Marie Antoinette about this. Let them eat crap or cake because, you know, he cares about them.
You're focusing very much on the poorest people in society. And I think that is because it justifies a certain amount of paternalism. I mean, but how many people only have a microwave in their house? Not that many. How many rich people are obese? A lot of them. There is a socio-economic divide with obesity, but it's not actually massive. And amongst men, it's actually very small. The reality is that there are 20-odd%
there are a lot of poor and obese people.
Of rich people are obese. OK, now, that's not because they can't afford to cook or they can't afford to buy turnips or what have you. It's because they don't do enough exercise and they like eating lots of rich food. And probably a lot of that rich food comes from restaurants, by the way, possibly even Jamie Oliver's restaurants when he had them.
But I still wonder, Chris, it is true that there are a lot of fat rich people, a lot of well-exercised rich people, but we know that poverty also leads, over-indexes on obesity, and that's to do with food choices and so on. I just wonder if I can get both of you to focus a bit on the issue of behaviour. And one of the things I'm hearing, I think is quite interesting, that is the problem here potentially government, Thomasina? Is there a possibility that people might take better advice? You talked about we and education. And maybe the problem is nobody likes to be told what to do by Boris Johnson, but they might like to be told what to do by Thomasina Miers.
I mean, no one likes to be told what to do, full step. I mean, talk to my husband, and he'll absolutely vouch that I don't like being told what to do. But I guess the point is that it's not affordable. You know, kids on low incomes are twice as likely to be obese. I mean, we know that. I'm a trustee of a charity. We absolutely know that. Yes, there are people who are rich who are also obese. I'm sure they don't want to be. And yes, of course, you know, junk food is delicious. You know, I'm the first one to succumb if I'm feeling tired or low. I want to eat some rubbish. It doesn't mean we should make it impossible for people on low incomes not to be able to achieve better food, as well as eating all the treats and the donuts when they want to. We're not telling people, thou shalt not eat that. And I think you're slightly misconstruing. The bog-offs largely are on junk food. Now, I know you're saying a ham cheese sandwich, but you can price promote good food. You can price promote healthy food as much as you want, and that would be brilliant, because then people might be able to afford to eat them better, as well as eating the delicious things as well.
I'm wondering, Chris, whether what I'm really trying to get at here is I wonder if part of the problem might be for both of you, government, and I know that, you know, from where you come from, having ministers telling people what to do is a kind of worst nightmare. But, for example, on the green agenda, on environment, it's proven to be possible, not 100%, it's possible for the private sector to develop offers that are more green and that have been taken up and have changed behaviours. Why not here?
Well, Public Health England started an initiative to try and do exactly that. Their magic idea was we're going to have food reformulation, we're going to set the food industry targets of reducing calories by 20% and sugar by 20% and salt they've been doing for 20 years or so. And somehow we're just going to get the calories out of the food, but it's going to be the same food, and people won't notice, and they'll just keep eating the same amount, and they'll consume 20% fewer calories. Absolutely ludicrous kind of cloud cuckoo land idea. And the food companies, to be fair, did have a go at it, and it didn't make any difference. But people just switched from the reformulated brands and started buying a different brand that wasn't reformulated, because people still have agency. People are still sovereign. And they can still spot. They will easily spot when something doesn't taste as nice, where you try to put in some saccharin instead of sugar. The food industry would love to produce low-calorie food that tastes delicious. They've been trying for decades. It is the holy grail of the food industry. They would clean up if they could make yoghurts with, 80% fewer calories or whatever it may be, or chocolate without sugar.
Of course
it's not going to happen.
Well, it's not being regulated. That's why. So there's no level playing field. As I said,
can't regulate
Dave
for it.
Lewis.
The idea is insane. You can't do it. Nobody will buy these products.
Why wouldn't they buy them if they're delicious?
Because they taste disgusting.
Are you saying that good food has to taste disgusting? It's just not true.
You can't take the sugar out of chocolate bars or sweets.
No, I'm not saying...
This is what Public Health England were trying to do.
Look, no one's wanting to take sugar out of chocolate bars or sweets.
Public Health England are.
That's ridiculous. The whole point of chocolate should be a treat. The point is what we're doing is we're serving the meals that people are eating every day, the ultra-processed food that's making 50% of our shopping basket. That's your everyday food. It's got no fibre, it's got no goodness, it's got no nutrition. You can easily produce delicious-tasting food that happens to also be good for you. And that's what the campaign is about. It's not...
Do you not think the food industry might have thought of this idea? You know, there are 60% of the population overweight. Probably most of them would quite like to lose a bit of weight. I could do with losing a stone myself. If there was something that tasted identical or even better, in your opinion, but with fewer calories, why wouldn't everybody be buying it?
Because it's more expensive and there's less profit in it.
Oh, it's going to be more expensive?
Of course it is. Fresh fruit and vegetables cost more.
We're not talking about fresh fruit and vegetables. We're talking about reformulating existing products.
So reformulating...
So just to be clear, you would still like the government to stop the bog-offs, and would you agree with William Hague that this is what they've done is morally reprehensible?
It's totally morally reprehensible because you can price promote and help people in low incomes to afford food. I've got to do that.
And do you think wait of time now, possibly a wait of time forever?
Yeah, it should be ditched for good. I mean, they've delayed this for 1 year because of the cost of living.
It's not to do with cost of living. It's got nothing to do with that.
That's been their justification. And you can see it's really bad optics. This is supposed to come in October when inflation is predicted to be about 10%. It would be terrible optics for the Tory government to be telling people we're going to stop you having access to these food discounts at a time when inflation is very high. But it's not going to be any better in October 2023, or it won't be much better by then. There will always be cost of living problems, and we shouldn't exacerbate them.
OK, well, it feels to me like we have a small amount of common ground, which is everybody should eat healthy food if they can. You started, actually, by agreeing that it could be less expensive, but then disagreed about that. It's clear that it's going to be difficult. But what I think you do both agree is it would be good if we could change people's behaviour, but we're not quite sure who the agent is. Personally, I think I've got to say, I think this is a place where government can send a message, and it can, to some extent, change behaviour. We'll see in a year's time whether that is true. If I'm wrong, bog-off won't ever come back. But anyway, thank you both very much for a lively discussion. Stay with us. Anna Botting will have all of today's news coming up after the break.